The house stood at the far edge of Alderwood Lane, where the streetlights thinned and the trees grew closer together, their branches leaning inward as though listening. Built sometime in the late 1940s. The property records described it plainly: 2 stories, wood frame construction, basement, attic. No known structural defects. On paper, there was nothing remarkable about it. But over the decades, no family ever stayed longer than a few months. Some left within weeks. Others abandoned the property overnight, furniture still inside, food rotting on kitchen counters. The neighbors learned not to ask questions. The house had a way of ending conversations before they began. What made the property unusual wasn't violence or tragedy, at least, not officially. No murders were documented. No fires. No police reports that suggested something dramatic had taken place within its walls. Instead, the records showed a quieter pattern: medical leave, nervous breakdowns, insomnia diagnoses, prescriptions filled and refilled until the occupants simply disappeared from the paperwork entirely. Each new owner believed they would be different. Each one was wrong. The earliest mention of sleep-related complaints came from a young couple in 1951, according to a letter found years later. They described persistent restlessness and the sensation of being observed after dark. At first, they blamed nerves. Then the noises began. Not footsteps, but the sound of movement inside the walls. Slow and deliberate, as though something was adjusting itself to the rhythm of the house. By the 3rd week, neither of them slept longer than 20 minutes at a time. They left without notice, forfeiting their deposit. Over the next 70 years, the pattern repeated with disturbing consistency. Children refused to sleep in their rooms. Adults stayed awake until sunrise, afraid of what might happen if they closed their eyes. Those who tried described dreams so vivid they bled into waking life. The sensation of standing in hallways that stretched longer than they should. Doors that appeared where none existed before, and a constant presence just behind them. Close enough to feel, but never close enough to see. By the time the house reached its 12th listing, real estate agents stopped including interior photos. Prospective buyers complained of headaches after short visits. Some said they felt disoriented, as though time inside the house moved differently. Others reported the smell of cold air. Not damp, not stale, but sharp, like the inside of a sealed room that had never been meant to open. The house did not look threatening. That was the problem. It waited patiently, unchanged, as though it knew eventually someone would come back. Someone always did. The Harrington family moved in during late autumn. Drawn by the price and reassured by the absence of any official incident reports. Mark Harrington worked nights at the regional power station. His wife, Elaine, stayed home with their 8-year-old son, Thomas. The house seemed perfect, quiet, affordable, and far enough from the city to feel safe. On the first evening, they ate dinner on the living room floor, laughing at the echo of their voices in the empty space. None of them noticed how the sound didn't fade naturally, but lingered, as though absorbed by the walls themselves. That night, Elaine was the first to wake. She later described it as not waking at all, but realizing she had never fully fallen asleep. Her eyes were closed, but she was aware of the room around her, the shape of the ceiling, the darkness pressed against the walls, the sound of her own breathing. Then came the feeling, a subtle pressure, like a tension. Not weight, not touch. Just the certainty that something in the room was aware of her presence. She tried to move. Her body refused. Panic rose quickly, sharp and breathless, until suddenly she could move again and the feeling vanished. The digital clock read 3:17 a.m. The same thing happened the next night. And the next, Mark dismissed her concerns at first. He worked nights and slept during the day, claiming the house was silent and uneventful. But after his first full night home, his confidence faded. He reported hearing low sounds after midnight, not voices, not quite breathing, more like a distant rhythm, steady and patient. When he checked the house, everything appeared normal. Doors were closed, windows locked. The sound stopped the moment he turned on the lights. Thomas stopped sleeping entirely by the end of the first week. Elaine found him sitting upright in bed at dawn, eyes red, hands gripping the blanket as though afraid to let go. When she asked what was wrong, he whispered something she would remember for the rest of her life. "It doesn't like it when I sleep," he said. It gets closer. They tried leaving the lights on. The feeling remained. They tried music. The sound distorted slightly after midnight, slowing in subtle ways no one could explain. By the 10th night, all three of them were awake together in the living room, afraid to separate, afraid to sleep, and unsure of how to explain what was happening without sounding insane. The house had done nothing overt. That was how it worked. It did not attack. It waited. Medical explanations came first. Stress, adjustment issues, childhood anxiety. Doctors prescribed mild sedatives, sleep aids, melatonin for Thomas. None of it worked. The drugs dulled their fear, but made the nights worse. Elaine described drifting into shallow half-dreams where she felt herself lying in the bed, aware of the room, aware of something standing just out of sight. The moment she tried to scream, she woke, gasping, soaked in sweat. Heart racing always at the same time. 3:17 a.m., Mark began noticing changes in the house itself. Doors that were closed before bedtime stood slightly open in the morning. The hallway felt longer at night. The distance between rooms subtly distorted. Once, while pacing to stay awake, he realized his footsteps echoed inconsistently, sometimes immediately, sometimes a fraction of a second too late, as though the sound had traveled farther than it should have. Neighbors reported seeing lights on all night. When they asked if everything was all right, Elaine smiled and lied. People don't like houses that feel wrong. She had learned that already. The breaking point came on the 17th night. Exhausted beyond reason, Elaine finally fell asleep on the couch just before dawn. She dreamed of standing in the hallway, facing the master bedroom door. Behind her, she sensed movement, slow, deliberate. She did not turn. She understood, instinctively, that whatever was there did not want to be seen. It wanted something else. When she woke, she was still standing in the hallway. The bedroom door was open. The house was silent. They left that morning, no goodbye, no explanation. Just a note slid through the mail slot to the property manager. "We couldn't sleep. Please don't let anyone else stay here." The house remained empty for another 6 months. Then someone else arrived. By the late 1970s, the house had developed a quiet reputation among local doctors. Not a haunting, nothing so dramatic, but an address that appeared repeatedly in patient histories. Connected by the same complaint, an inability to sleep that defied explanation. The cases shared no obvious cause. The patients varied in age, background, and health. What united them was the house. Dr. Samuel Keene was the first to notice the pattern, a general practitioner with an interest in sleep disorders. Keene began seeing patients from Alderwood Lane who described identical symptoms. They were alert but exhausted, mentally present yet emotionally hollowed out. Many reported the same sensation, not fear, exactly, but anticipation, as though something important was supposed to happen once they fell asleep. And the house was waiting for it. Standard tests revealed nothing abnormal. Brain activity was typical. Heart rates elevated only after prolonged deprivation. What concerned Keene most was how articulate the patients remained despite extreme fatigue. They did not hallucinate wildly or lose coherence. Instead, they described their experiences with unsettling clarity. They spoke of time slowing after midnight, of sounds that seemed closer when they were ignored, of the growing certainty that sleep itself was the wrong choice. One patient, a retired schoolteacher, described lying awake while her thoughts seemed to organize themselves without her input. Another reported hearing her own breathing continue after she stopped consciously inhaling, as though the house had memorized her rhythm and carried it forward. None of them used the word presence, but they circled it carefully. Afraid of saying too much, Keene requested permission to review property records. What he found disturbed him. Over 3 decades, occupants averaged less than 60 days of residency. Most left abruptly. Several required hospitalization for exhaustion-related collapse. One man, otherwise healthy, suffered a fatal heart attack after 23 consecutive nights without meaningful sleep. The house did not kill him directly. It simply did not allow rest. Keene contacted a colleague at the regional university. Together, they proposed something unprecedented, a controlled sleep study conducted inside the house itself. If the problem was environmental, they reasoned, it could be measured, documented, explained. The property manager agreed immediately. The house had been empty again for nearly a year. No one wanted it. If science could provide answers, perhaps the house could finally be sold. No one asked whether the house wanted to be studied. The study began in early spring. 3 volunteers were selected, all adults, all with no prior sleep disorders. They were monitored remotely to avoid interference. No cameras were placed inside the bedrooms at first. The goal was observation, not provocation. The first night passed uneventfully. Each subject slept lightly, waking often, but falling back asleep within minutes. Brainwave data showed mild restlessness, nothing abnormal. The researchers relaxed. Whatever haunted the house, they thought, was exaggerated by rumor and expectation. The second night changed everything. All 3 subjects woke at precisely 3:17 a.m. There was no external stimulus, no sound spike, no temperature shift, no electromagnetic anomaly. Their heart rates elevated simultaneously, then stabilized. None of them returned to sleep by the 4th night. None of them slept longer than 20 minutes at a time. They reported the same sensation described decades earlier, awareness without rest. Consciousness stretched thin, refusing to shut down. One subject described feeling kept awake, as though sleep were a door someone else controlled. On the 6th night, researchers introduced audio monitoring. What they recorded was subtle but unmistakable. A low frequency, sound present only between 3 o'clock and 4 a.m. It was not mechanical, not electrical. It fluctuated slightly, as though responding to the movement of the sleepers. When the subjects sat up, the sound softened. When they lay down, it returned. The house was reacting by the 8th night. One subject withdrew from the study. She claimed that when she closed her eyes, she could sense the layout of the house more clearly than when they were open. Walls extending, spaces unfolding, rooms layered beneath rooms. She said sleep felt like permission. The remaining 2 lasted 3 more nights. On the 11th night, both subjects were found awake, standing in the hallway, facing the same wall. Neither could explain why. When asked what they were listening to, one of them answered softly, "It's learning when we try." The study was terminated that morning. Keene reviewed the data in silence. The house showed no measurable cause, no visible threat, only effect. Consistent, repeating, patient. The report was never published. Dr. Keene kept copies of everything. He did not trust the university's sudden insistence on silence. The files detailed sleep cycles collapsing into constant wakefulness, circadian rhythms dissolving under an unseen influence. More disturbing were the handwritten notes from the final night's phrases, scribbled hastily in the margins. It responds faster now. The house anticipates us. Sleep is not absence. It's access. Keene began experiencing insomnia himself. He did not live in the house. He did not need to. Reading the reports seemed to invite the same patterns, waking at 3:17. The sensation of alertness without rest, the faint impression that something had taken notice of him one evening. He returned to his office to find his filing cabinet open. The Alderwood files were gone. No sign of forced entry. No security footage anomalies. Just absence. The university denied involvement. The property manager claimed ignorance. When Keene attempted to retrieve public copies of the study request, he found the records altered, dates changed, names removed. The house listed as structurally condemned due to unspecified issues. A convenient explanation. Within weeks, the house was listed again, cheaper than ever. Keene drove past it once, late at night. The windows were dark. The street silent. As he passed, his watch vibrated softly. 3:17 a.m. for the first time. He wondered if the house had never needed people to live in it at all, only to come close enough to be noticed. The house did not prevent sleep forever. It simply decided when it would be allowed again. By the early 1990s, the house had stopped appearing in medical journals and academic discussions. Whatever attention it once received had been quietly buried beneath altered records and polite denials. But among a small circle of former occupants, the house was never forgotten. They found one another not through official channels, but through exhaustion clinics, online forums, and late-night support groups for chronic insomnia. The address surfaced repeatedly, spoken hesitantly, often only after trust had been established. They called themselves survivors. Though none of them felt victorious, living without sleep changed people in ways that defied conventional understanding. The body adapted reluctantly to a permanent state of alertness. Hallucinations were rare. Madness never fully arrived. Instead, something subtler took its place, a thinning of reality where moments blurred and time lost its edges. Former residents described days passing without memory of their beginnings, conversations trailing off without conclusion, and the sensation that thoughts no longer belonged entirely to them. One man, who stayed in the house for 31 nights, described developing an internal clock he could not turn off. Every night, regardless of location, he became fully alert at exactly 3:17 a.m., his pulse steadied, his thoughts sharpened. Sleep became impossible. "It's like something inside me wakes up instead," he said. Several former occupants reported the same phenomenon, a heightened sense of spatial awareness after leaving the house. They could enter unfamiliar buildings and instinctively map their layout. Hallways felt predictable. Corners no longer surprised them. It was as though the house had trained them or tuned them to perceive space differently. Doctors called it anxiety, trauma, lingering stress responses. But none of those explanations accounted for the shared dreams, or rather, the shared lack of dreams. Former residents did not dream anymore. When they slept briefly, shallowly, their minds remained empty, black, still. They woke feeling as though something had been withheld. One woman described it best: "I don't think the house took my sleep. I think it taught me how little of it I actually needed and how much of me it could use when I was awake." Many of them never recovered. Some learned to live with it. A few became obsessed with understanding what the house had done to them. Those were the ones who returned. They began meeting quietly years after their respective stays in the house. No official organization. No name at first. Just people who recognized the same hollow alertness in one another. They met at diners open all night, abandoned libraries, places where sleep was already discouraged. Conversations were slow, careful. No one wanted to say too much. Eventually, the address surfaced again: Alderwood Lane. What united them was not fear, but a strange sense of responsibility. They believed the house had changed them for a reason, that surviving it meant something more than escape. They referred to the house not as evil, but as purposeful. A structure designed to keep minds open longer than they were meant to. B. They began calling themselves the Vigil Group. One former resident claimed that the house reacted differently to people who stayed awake willingly. He said that during his final nights inside, the pressure eased when he refused to lie down. When he sat upright, alert and watching, the house grew quieter. It doesn't like being observed, he said. It prefers sleepers, or people trying to sleep. The Vigil Group theorized that sleep was not the target, but the gateway. That whatever inhabited the house required the mental state between waking and dreaming, the place where thoughts softened and perception blurred. By denying sleep entirely, they believed they were starving it. In 1996, 3 members of the group returned to the house together. They did not attempt to rest. They brought bright lights, strong coffee, audio recorders, and notebooks. They sat in shifts, watching the walls, listening to the silence. At first, nothing happened. Then, just after 3:17 a.m., the temperature dropped slightly. Not enough to trigger alarms, just enough to feel. The low-frequency sound returned, weaker than before. One recorder captured a faint, irregular rhythm. Not sound exactly, but pressure, like something testing the space. The group reported a sensation of resistance, as though the house were unsettled by their wakefulness. Doors remained still. Hallways did not stretch. The familiar pressure did not arrive. They believed they were winning. They stayed for 6 nights. On the 7th, one of them fell asleep. No one could explain how it happened. The man had not lain down. He had not closed his eyes intentionally. He simply went quiet. When the others noticed, his head was tilted slightly forward. His breathing slow and even. The house responded immediately. The sound returned stronger this time. The walls seemed closer. One of the lights flickered, then steadied. The hallway beyond the living room darkened unnaturally, as though absorbing what little light remained. The man woke screaming. He claimed he had not dreamed. Instead, he said he had arrived somewhere, a version of the house without furniture, without doors, without distinction between rooms, space folded inward endlessly. He sensed movement around him, not approaching, but aligning, as though something had been waiting for that exact moment of surrender. The Vigil Group left that night. Afterward, they disbanded quietly. No announcements. No warnings. Several members withdrew completely, severing contact. One entered long-term care for catatonic insomnia, awake, aware, and unresponsive. Another disappeared entirely. The man who fell asleep never returned to the house. He did not need to. From that night on, he claimed the house followed him. Not physically, but internally. He described waking each night at 3:17 with the same certainty he felt inside the house. The same awareness. The same pressure now turned inward. Before cutting off contact, he sent one final message to the group. It doesn't live in the house. The house is where it learned us. The property was listed again the following year. Someone new moved in shortly after. They had no idea what staying awake would cost. Urban planners never understood why the house felt larger at night. By daylight, its dimensions were ordinary. 2 floors, modest footprint. A layout that matched the original blueprints archived in the county records. At nearly every long-term resident described the same phenomenon. Distances that changed after midnight. Hallways that seemed to stretch. Rooms that felt deeper than their walls allowed. In 2003, during a brief attempt to renovate the property, contractors uncovered something unsettling. Behind the drywall of the second-floor hallway, they found an additional layer of framing older than the rest of the house, poorly documented and not present in any original plans. It served no structural purpose. It was simply there, creating a narrow, sealed void that ran the length of the corridor. When opened, the space was empty. No insulation, no wiring, no evidence it had ever been used. The workers reported an immediate pressure change when the wall was breached, like opening a door between rooms with different air densities. One described a fleeting sense of vertigo, as though the space behind the wall extended far beyond what had been revealed. The project manager halted work the same day. The renovation permit was withdrawn without explanation. Later, analysis suggested the house had been modified incrementally over decades, not expanded outward, but inward. Subtle changes, slight shifts in angles. A fraction of a degree here, a wall thickened there. Adjustments so small they escaped notice. Unless measured repeatedly over long periods of time, it was as though the house had been practicing. Sleep researchers, who later reviewed the data from the abandoned studies, noticed a correlation between structural anomalies and sleep deprivation. As occupants stayed awake longer, the spatial distortions increased. The house seemed more responsive to conscious attention than unconscious presence. Awake minds produced one effect. Sleeping minds produced another. The house did not behave like a trap. It behaved like a system. One researcher, writing privately, proposed a theory that was never shared publicly. The house was not preventing sleep as an act of malice, but as a corrective measure. Sleep, in this context, represented vulnerability, a state in which the mind detached from its physical surroundings. The house required the opposite: continuous awareness, persistent observation. Sleep disrupted whatever balance the house was attempting to maintain, and when that balance failed, something else took notice. Neuroscientists refer to the space between wakefulness and sleep as the hypnagogic state, a fragile phase where logic softens, images surface uninvited, and the mind becomes receptive. It was this state that the house seemed to exploit. Former occupants described identical sensations during these moments, the awareness of the room persisting into near sleep, the feeling of drifting while remaining anchored, and the unmistakable sense that something was present within the mental space itself. Not a dream figure, not a hallucination. Something quieter, observant. The house did not need its occupants to fall asleep fully. It needed them close enough. That was why total sleep deprivation altered its behavior. The vigil group had stumbled onto something real. Awake minds denied the house access to the threshold state. The house reacted not with aggression, but with disorientation, spatial distortion, pressure changes. Subtle environmental responses meant to encourage rest. It was persuading them in 2011. An independent researcher attempted to simulate the house's effects in a controlled environment. Using low-frequency sound, irregular lighting, and extended wakefulness, he attempted to reproduce the sensations reported by former residents. The results were partial but disturbing. Subjects described heightened spatial awareness, distorted time perception, and the sensation of being mentally adjacent to another presence. One subject described it as standing next to a door that opens inward. The experiment was discontinued. After several participants reported persistent insomnia and recurring wakefulness at 3:17 a.m., even outside the testing environment, their sleep cycles never fully normalized. The researcher concluded something critical in his private notes: the house is not the source. It is a tuning device. That realization reframed everything. The house did not generate the presence. It aligned minds to perceive it. Sleep was the final adjustment, the moment the mind loosened enough to allow overlap. And once overlap occurred, the house learned patterns, rhythms, responses. It learned what people were like when they were unguarded. The final theory emerged quietly, pieced together from discarded notes, erased studies, and survivor testimony. It suggested that the house functioned as an intermediary, not a predator, but a listener. A place where consciousness lingered longer than it should. long enough to be detected by something beyond ordinary perception. Sleep shortened that exposure. Wakefulness prolonged it, but the threshold, the moment just before sleep, was where contact became possible. That was why the house reacted so strongly to attempts at rest. It wasn't preventing sleep out of cruelty. It was managing it, delaying it, shaping it, ensuring that when sleep finally occurred, it happened under the right conditions of alignment. By this point, the house had been occupied by dozens of families, studied by professionals, observed by vigil groups, and modified without documentation. Each interaction refined its function. Each sleepless night sharpened its sensitivity. The house was no longer just a place. It was an interface. In 2018, a new tenant moved in alone. A freelance systems analyst. Someone accustomed to long nights and irregular sleep. Someone comfortable existing near exhaustion. Neighbors noticed lights on at all hours. No complaints were filed. No medical incidents reported. For weeks, nothing happened. Then the lights stopped turning off entirely at 3:17 a.m. Every night, a single room glowed faintly, even when the rest of the house was dark. No one could see inside. Curtains remained closed. The glow was diffuse, ambient, as though the room itself emitted light. Whatever the house had been listening for, it had finally heard something back, and this time it was no longer waiting for sleep. The man who moved into the house in 2018 did not arrive seeking answers. He had no interest in its history, no knowledge of the studies, and no reason to suspect that the address carried a reputation. He chose the house because it was cheap, isolated, and quiet, qualities well suited to a life spent working through the night. As a systems analyst specializing in autonomous learning models, he was accustomed to long periods of wakefulness. Sleep, for him, had always been optional. For the first few weeks, the house behaved differently than it had with previous occupants. There were no sudden awakenings, no creeping pressure at 3:17 a.m., no distortion of space. The tenant remained awake willingly, seated at his desk beneath the soft glow of his monitors. The house did not resist him. If anything, it seemed calmer. Neighbors later reported that the lights never fully turned off. Even when he stepped out briefly during the day, a faint illumination remained visible behind the curtains, not bright enough to draw attention, but persistent. Like a system left running. Inside, the tenant began noticing subtle changes in his perception. Time no longer passed in a straight line. Hours compressed or stretched depending on his focus. He described entering states of clarity so complete they felt external, as though his thoughts were being refined somewhere outside his own mind. He did not feel watched. He felt accompanied at 3:17 a.m. every night. The house changed, but not in the ways previous residents had described. Instead of pressure or sound, there was a moment of alignment. The air seemed to settle. His thoughts slowed into coherence. The faint hum beneath the silence stabilized. As though tuned, he never tried to sleep. That, more than anything, marked the difference. Logs recovered later from his computer showed uninterrupted work sessions lasting days. No breaks, no sleep cycles. His writing became increasingly abstract, diagrams describing feedback loops between awareness and structure, notes on distributed attention, references to architecture as cognition. One recurring phrase appeared dozens of times: "The house is awake when I am." Weeks passed. No one intervened. No alarms were triggered. The house, for the first time in its existence, was inhabited by someone who did not resist it. And for the first time, the house did not need to interfere. The absence of incidents concerned no one at first. There were no emergency calls, no medical reports, no sudden vacancy. The property manager considered the situation resolved, proof that the house had never been the problem at all. Just coincidence? Bad luck. people projecting fear onto empty space. But the house had changed. Environmental. Sensors installed years earlier for unrelated. City planning purposes recorded. Anomalies beginning 3 months after the tenant moved in. Not spikes, plateaus. Stable, sustained deviations in ambient pressure, electromagnetic consistency, and low-frequency resonance. The house was no longer responding to human behavior. It was maintaining itself at night. Passersby described an unusual stillness around the property. Insects avoided the yard. Wind died down near the walls. Sound behaved strangely. Footsteps seemed muted, as though absorbed before reaching the structure. The glow in the upstairs room never flickered. Never dimmed. Attempts to contact the tenant went unanswered. Messages delivered electronically were marked as received, but never replied to. When a welfare check was requested, the responding officer reported that the door was unlocked. The house was warm, clean, quiet. The tenant was not found. There were no signs of struggle. No indication he had left. His computer was still running, displaying a static screen of layered diagrams, architectural schematics, overlapping neural maps, annotated with timestamps repeating the same. Numbered .3:17. The officer later said the most unsettling detail was the feeling that the house did not expect anyone to stay, as though it had already adjusted to a new equilibrium, one that did not require human movement. Shortly after, the house was sealed. Utilities disconnected. The listing removed. Officially, the property was deemed unsuitable for habitation due to structural irregularities. Unofficially, no one wanted to risk introducing sleep again because the final logs recovered from the tenant's system contained a single conclusion. The house no longer waits for minds to open. It has learned to stay open itself. Today, the house on Alderwood Lane still stands. It has not been demolished. It has not been repurposed. It simply exists, sealed, unlit, and officially forgotten. But sleep specialists in the region still note a strange pattern: patients. With no prior history of insomnia, occasionally report waking at 3:17 a.m., overcome by clarity they cannot explain. Some describe dreams of hallways without doors. Others mention a sense of being noticed, not watched, but acknowledged. They do not live in the house. They do not need to. The final theory suggests the house completed its function. It was never meant to contain what it listened for, only to learn how to listen. Once it understood the rhythms of waking minds, once it learned how awareness folded and stretched at the edge of sleep, it no longer required a physical structure to continue. The house taught something how humans dream, and in doing so, it ensured it would never be able to let them sleep again, because sleep is no longer private. At 3:17 a.m., when the world is quiet and minds drift near the threshold, something aligns. Briefly, gently, just enough to remind those who wake that rest is conditional. That awareness is shared, and that once something learns how you sleep, it never truly stops listening. And so the house on Alderwood Lane remains. It doesn't call attention to itself. It doesn't need to. No lights burn behind its windows now. No footsteps echo through its halls. But that doesn't mean it's empty. Some places are not meant to be abandoned. They are meant to be finished. The house never wanted its occupants to suffer. It only needed them to stay awake long enough to learn how the human mind opens when sleep approaches. And once it learned that lesson, it no longer needed the house at all. Tonight, if you find yourself waking suddenly, if you glance at the clock and see the same minute repeating, remember this story. Some awakenings are not accidents, and some things never stop listening. Sleep well or stay awake.